Okay. Um, this is a supplement to this video series that I'm putting together of my entire adult life history. And it's specifically to address the misrepresentations on prison disciplinary infractions that were engaged in 2008 that actually ended up being input in the NCIC database as actual criminal arrest charges and convictions, even though they're not. In 2008, actually in March of 2008, Paul Allen Levy, who is a former personal attorney of Ben Smith, who has been pushing this from day one, actually had his client send a letter to the Colorado Department of Corrections making outright false statements saying that they had been threatened, their family had been threatened, and that they were in fear for themselves and their families' lives, and that they were in absolute need of copies of my Department of Corrections inmate records. And they claimed that their identity needed to be kept confidential because by not doing so would actually put them in more harm. And even though I have letters from the Department of Corrections in May of 2008 telling me how it came about and stating that they would be making a decision as to whether or not to release the identity of the requester after an Inspector General's report or investigation was completed. Interestingly enough, Thomas Cole did not follow up on that, and turns out that when I pushed him on it later, the claim was that the information was no longer in the department's records because they were purged after 3 years. Believe me when I tell you, when we get to the end of the series, you're going to understand why I'm giving you this supplement. But first, I want to talk about prisons. You know, it's amazing how everybody talks about prisons, especially when they're trying to use it to discredit and smear someone. Unless you've actually been in one, I would venture to say that you don't have a clue. Really, you don't have a clue. And depending on what state, understand prison systems are not uniform from state to state. Every state's different. When I was incarcerated in Arizona in 1980, let me give you a quick history of that particular system. Arizona was actually notorious right alongside of New Mexico for being probably one of the most racially divided and agitated prison systems in the country. They had riots, they had inmates killing each other, all race-based, from the Aryan Brotherhood to the Mexican Mafia to a black gang known as the Mau Mau, you name it. And I think people today have this impression that prison, you're pretty much locked up, it's strict, the guards and administrators are in control, everything's calculated. You have no clue. Being in prison is like being in a totally different society with its own monetary system, with its own, oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, it's a whole different society. It's like its own little government. And no matter how much you think that the states and the prison administrators and whatnot are in control, 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. But um, for me, I've never been afraid of anything or anyone, so it really wasn't. For me, it wasn't that unsettling. I think the part that probably was more disturbing to me at first was the racial divide, and literally, for example, when I changed my name the first time, in the first video you saw, to Silvas, I didn't change my name to hide anything. See, I've always been openly gay, and I've always said that gay marriage wasn't necessary to be with someone. And back then, you weren't even talking about gay marriage, but I actually changed my name because I fell for a guy named Tomas Silvas. And trust me when I tell you, I had to fall in heart because I don't fall for people. It takes a lot for me to get to that point. But anyway, when all of this started taking place in 2008, and people, and Paul Allen Levy and Ben Smith and all of these so-called internet warriors, these anonymous bloggers that were putting out these disciplinary records from Colorado and Arizona and saying all of these things about how violent I was and how dangerous I was. I requested that the Colorado Department of Corrections provide me with a copy of the Colorado Department of Corrections Code of Penal Discipline for the period from 1987 through 1997. Of course, they rejected my request, denied my request, stating that the information was not for public release. So I had been for a while trying to locate copies of the Code of Penal Discipline as it was in effect during that time frame. And I have not been able to, but I did, however, come across, the closest one I've come across would be a revised version from 2006. Now, granted, after reviewing it, I am glad to see that some things have been updated and modified. But I want to actually go over a few things. I want to show you something, and I'll tell you what's different in 2006 that was not the case during my period of incarceration there. This first scene this is actually the Code of Penal Discipline, administrative regulation, and it was effective February 15th of 2006. The highlighted sections I've highlighted because they kind of refer to what people were trying to misrepresent about me. Definitions: attempt. An offender commits an attempt when, with intent to commit an offense, he engages in conduct which tends to affect the commission of such offense. It is an affirmative defense to the charge of attempt that the offender voluntarily abandoned his effort to commit the offense prior to the discovery of his active participation in the offense or offenses, or before it is substantially completed. Then we go to complicity. An offender may be charged, tried, and convicted of any offense based upon the conduct of another person if, with the intent that the offense be committed, he commands, induces, encourages, procures, or aids the other to commit it. In an affirmative defense to the charge of complicity, that the offender, prior to the commission of the offense, voluntarily withdrew from any active participation in the offense. In any prosecution where the Liability of the accused offender is based upon the conduct of another offender. It is no defense that the other offender has been found not guilty or has not been prosecuted or has been convicted of a different offense. Now, contraband. Any item that a staff visitor or offender is not specifically authorized to have in his or her possession. Any item that has been altered and or is being used for other than its intended purpose. Any items over the 3 cubic foot allowable personal property limit. Any items listed in the consent to search authorization. Any item listed in the Code of Penal Discipline. Any item listed on the administrative head's declaration of contraband. Any items that may threaten the safety and security of a DOC facility, offenders, staff, or visitors, or any item listed as contraband in an administrative regulation, implementation adjustments, or operational memorandums. Then dangerous contraband definition: a firearm, knives, bludgeons, or other weapon, device, instrument, material, or substances, whether animate or inanimate, which is readily capable of causing or inducing fear of death or physical injury. This may include needles and Class A and B tools. Now, I'm giving you these 2006 definitions. And when I get to the parts that are different from when I was in, I'll let you know. Physical injury: any physical injury which creates substantial risk of death or which causes death, serious disfigurement, substantial pain, impairment of health, loss or impairment of any major bodily function, or which requires any medical attention. Possess: now this has slightly changed. To knowingly exercise physical control over an object. Knowledge should be conclusively presumed when an object is found on an offender's person, his clothing, or in plain view. Knowledge should be rebuttably presumed when an object is found anywhere in an offender's cell or in a place where it is likely that only the offender could have placed it. This presumption may be rebutted by evidence that the offender was not responsible for the object's presence. Offenders are presumed responsible for items found in a common area in a multi-occupancy cell. The presumption of responsibility can be rebutted if proven otherwise. Now, this has changed, and I will tell you the difference in definition here. This revised Code of Penal Discipline from 2006 actually now gives an offender the opportunity to defend against something found in their cell rather than automatically being considered to be guilty of possession. Whereas when I was in the system, possession meant anything that was found in your cell. You didn't have the opportunity to rebut it. It didn't matter what evidence you had or could prove that you did not put it there and did not know it was there. The fact that it was found in your cell meant that you were guilty of possession. And that's important because I'm going to get to that in a minute. Possession of dangerous contraband. An offender commits this offense when he possesses, uses, has under his control or in his custody any item defined as dangerous contraband. Offenders in possession of any unauthorized Class A or B tools may be found guilty of this violation. Dealing in dangerous drugs. An offender commits this offense when he sells or gives away any quantity of any item defined as dangerous drugs. Threaten or intimidation of public officials. Now, this definition and charge has actually changed. It used to be referred to as threats, was the infraction, was the violation. An offender commits this offense when he communicates to a public official a determination, scheme, or intent to cause or to instill the fear of death, injury, terrorism, or intimidation. Such communication may be verbal, physical, or written. Now, the difference in this definition now compared to when I was in the system is the definition of threats was defined as any act that any DOC employee felt was threatening to them. It didn't have to be any specific indication or communication of any actual threat to do anything. The definition of the charge, as long as any DOC employee said that they felt threatened, whether it was by the way you were standing, the way you were looking, the tone of your voice, or whatever, you were considered guilty of threats. Theft. An offender commits this offense when he knowingly obtains or exercises control over property or services belonging to someone else without authorization. Value of property or services should be substantiated by written documentation if restitution is to be sought or ordered as a sanction. Sexual abuse. Now, this infraction's actual title has changed. It used to be sexual misconduct. An offender commits this offense when he has active or passive contact or funneling between his genitals, hands, mouth, buttocks, anus, or breast, and the genitals, hands, mouth, buttocks, anus, or breast of another person. Contact can be with or without clothing being worn by one or both parties. Possession or use of dangerous drugs. An offender commits this offense if he possesses or uses any quantity of unauthorized dangerous drugs. Now, the interesting thing about this is this particular charge or violation now suddenly is somewhat lighter. When I was in the system, possession of dangerous drugs, actually the definition referred to anything found, whether it was found on you or in your cell or anywhere where you controlled. It did not matter whether you were the one that put it there, whether you knew it was there. The fact that it was there, you were considered guilty of possession of it. Now, here's threats redefined also. An offender commits this offense when he communicates or demonstrates. When he communicates a determination or intent, either verbally, physically, or in writing, to injure another person or to commit a crime of violence or an unlawful act presently or in the future, and the probable consequence of such threat or threats, whether or not such consequence in fact occurs, is to place another person in fear of bodily injury or to cause damage to property or to jeopardize the security of the facility. Now, this is more in tune to the definition of when I was in the system, with the exception, even this particular definition of the violation of threats still does not include the language that was included at the time I was in the system, which you didn't have to communicate anything. the individual only had to say that they felt threatened. You didn't have to do anything. You could simply be standing there looking at them. And all they had to do was say that by you standing there looking at them, they felt threatened and you were guilty of threats. Now, let's go to the last one. Disobeying a lawful order. An offender commits this offense when he refuses to obey a verbal or written order or instruction given by a DOC staff member, which is reasonable in nature and which gives reasonable notice of the conduct expected, or he violates any special conditions of his community placement. Violating a posted operational rule is not an offense under this subsection. However, refusing a verbal or written order to comply with the posted operational rule is. And then, of course, verbal abuse. An offender commits this offense when he subjects another person to abusive, offensive, or defamatory language or gestures. In other words, you don't have to be talking to that person. That person just simply has to be in earshot. Now, the reason I wanted to point these out is because in addition to getting my disciplinary records, they started posting that I was convicted of possession of dangerous drugs. One, they didn't know the definition of the rule violation, or if they did, they didn't bother to publish it. And two, apparently they didn't bother to actually get the hearing records for that violation, because it was Major Richard Murray, who was the hearing officer on that. And Murray knew point blank that, number one, I had just moved into that cell. Number two, there wasn't an officer in the Department of Corrections that would ever have found me guilty of possession of dangerous drugs, because it was something that they knew I would never do, never had done. But as Murray pointed out, he had no choice but to find me guilty, because the Code of Penal Discipline specifically defines possession as any dangerous drug found, whether it's in my cell or on my person. The fact that it was found in a cell that I had been assigned to made me guilty. But see, the facts and the truth of things didn't matter to these guys. Now, let's go to claims of possession of a dangerous weapon. And they were referring to a infraction that I knew was a setup. I was charged with a disciplinary violation of possession of a dangerous weapon because during an altercation with officers, they claimed that they found a homemade plastic shank. Shank is referred to as a device similar to a knife. People would make them out of toothpick or toothpaste or toothbrush handles, combs, whatever. This particular alleged shank was supposedly made out of plastic from a food tray. They claimed that it was found inside the cell's door jamb. I was found guilty of it because, again, the definition of possession is in your cell. However, it pissed me off. And back then, you think I'm a fighter now. Boy, you should have known me then. So I actually demanded that they have CID investigate, do a fingerprint examination of everything, because I knew damn well they wouldn't find my prints on it. And just so you understand, things like that, if they were yours and you put them in those places, your prints are going to be all over them, because there's no damn way they're not going to be. In fact, I actually have letters from the CID investigator in my possession, trying to set up a polygraph exam on that very matter. But see, they didn't bother to tell you this. They didn't bother to publish that. They didn't bother to include that. And the reason they didn't is because had they done that, they couldn't have said, oh, well, look, he's a dangerous individual. He actually had homemade knives in prison. Let's see. What else? Threats, intimidation. Again, I'm not even going to waste my breath on those, because like I said, if you pissed off an officer, you're going to get verbal abuse and threats from here to hell and back, simply because at the time, all they had to do was just simply say you looked at them wrong, or that you were cussing in their earshot. Doesn't matter. So I wanted to get this supplement because, like I said, it's going to come in handy towards the end of this, because after we get past the part 3, all of this is going to be addressed, because then we get into the years of 2008, when they started distributing all of this crap. And the fact that you're going to be surprised that you have licensed attorneys and whatnot that were involved in this effort. It's going to be interesting, but it's going to completely destroy every single thing that has been pushed and published about me since 2008. Guarantee it.